I'd definitely say it was the most difficult sequence in the film from a sort of overall visual effects technical standpoint, and just the sheer amount of work, of craft from our team, the visual effects team that went into it. I think it probably is the big standout sequence in the movie.
And the thing about George is, as a director, he wants to direct actors. He wants to direct actors in costume. He needs to immerse himself in the scene to get the best out of himself and the actors. So a lot of what we're doing in planning this scene was creating an environment where everybody could see what we were doing, or what at least an end result might look like, as opposed to just a blank canvas. You know, we didn't use green screens on this show for a reason, and that's because they're sterile, and the actors and George couldn't direct the performance they wanted against a black canvas. I was really worried that this couldn't look like the holodeck from Star Trek. It couldn't look like the holodeck from Red Dwarf. This wasn't an immersive VR experience. This was one step beyond a photograph. And it was very personal, which is why it's almost built into the confessional. It's in this quiet space where you can go and you can be alone and you can meditate on what you've left behind. And as a consequence, it had to feel like that, and it had to feel like you weren't totally immersed. You couldn't control the situation. You could just observe it. And I feel that is different. This is the first time we've seen that.
I think there were some interesting conversations that happened around space, because we were trying to figure out how to shoot zero-G, which is always a challenge. And we had a design of a spaceship, but there was a real question of how much of that to build. I think to Jim and the production's credit, really, they entrusted the visual effects team with a lot of, they gave us full rein, really, to go ahead and fully build the exterior space environments. Jenny Egan, the costume designer, really embraced working with us to get an astronaut EVA costume that would work really well as a digital spacesuit as well as in camera. So I think that I hope they feel like that decision paid off, because I think the results are really good. But
George, as a director, is very much, this is your job. This is your expertise. Show me stuff and I'll tell you if I like it. So there's a lot of pressure, but at the same time, a lot of freedom. And I've just been lucky that we've managed to show things that he does actually like. We used a virtual camera system, which involved Martin Roux, our DOP, where he could take an iPad. If he wanted to, he could take the VR goggles, but he preferred it with an iPad, and physically block out shots in a virtual space. So we taped out where the spaceship was in tape and the scale, and we just let him walk around the environment for a while.
There was a whole question of how the airlock would be staged relative to the bit that they had to fix, and Jim kind of worked with that previs to figure that out and to get the dimensionality of it. And what was nice was that it wasn't just a kind of blocked out thing, because we were working, one of our art directors was designing the spaceship right down to every kind of nut and bolt, working with Jim. So we were able to visualize that in this previs team, and to kind of understand the design as well as in a rich sense, not just in a kind of blocky sense. I think that really aided the process, and it's where technology's kind of come on further and helps us in this contemporary era to do things better than we've done before.
It was very symbiotic. All of the heads of department were quite invested, including stunts, in this virtual shooting process, and it fed down very quickly. And there were weekly catch-ups and daily reviews of the cuts and how it progressed. And it meant that when we came to physically shoot the sequence, we were incredibly faithful to our previous cut.
Our philosophy in visual effects is really to try and help the filmmakers realise these impossible things. That's what makes the job fun. And so the last thing we'd want to do is create a barrier via technology. It was all about trying to make the technology be really in the background and invisible, and allow them to do their jobs, and then just kind of give it to them if they needed it, to see, just to cross-check, gut-check whether they were doing the right thing. I think with the digital spacesuits it works well because you've got control of the body, and so you can give a sympathetic animation performance, and that was part of the craft that went on in post-production, was to really imbue those characters with the actor's original intent and to kind of create a completely synthesized animated performance that you watch and you just completely buy it. And you can see every fiber of thread on their costumes, and I watch it and I just think it looks real. It doesn't, I don't question it. I think there's something amazing, magical that happens on any film set when you have a talented DOP and talented filmmakers all get together and they start looking through the camera lens. And we've all had this feeling as filmmakers of standing just over here and looking at it and thinking, that's not going to work. And then you look through the camera and it's just incredible. And I think what the stagecraft process and the LED process brought to the film, it wasn't necessarily that there were going to be cheaper shots. It was really that the shots were going to be better, because there they were, framing and composing, and these wonderful accidents happen. You might get a reflection over here that you weren't anticipating that you framed for, and all that kind of thing is really important. And I think takes the sort of sterility out of the process of making visual effects.
Everybody was kind of one of those moments where everyone's kind of going, wow, this is really cool. It's back to make-believe, which in all honesty is why most of us are in film, because we wanted to continue the make-believe, and this just was an aid to do that. What we really wanted was space, quite literally. So Jupiter has 63 moons, and we realised, this is quite a small moon, so it's got quite a low horizon. It's all about the sky. So we ended up thinning out a lot of the environment and making it look alien, and filling it with moons and sky, and it's all about the space, and it's one of the kind of true nods to a science fiction pastiche.
We opted relatively early on, I think, to not use those and to go with more of a kind of traditional stunt sort of 4-point harness. It does swing. And again, to just embrace that for the things it's good at, which is normally when anytime the swing isn't really an issue, when they're being sort of moved around with their own arms or propelling themselves along, that freedom is actually good, because you don't want to computer control that motion anyway. And then where it wasn't so good, we would lean towards digital body replacements.
They were an acting aid, they were a directing aid, and they were beautifully designed. And what I particularly liked, which is unusual for spacesuits, and Jenny did a great job here, is they're quite aesthetic and as flattering as a spacesuit can be. Most people, when they get into a traditional spacesuit, look like a Teletubby, whereas these still quite had a sleekness about them, and yet utterly believable.
One of the amazing things about doing any space movie is that there's all this fantastic reference shot by the team on the International Space Station that's become, I think, part of our sort of global understanding of what it's like to be in zero G. And there's some fantastic videos. I'm trying to remember exactly who shot them now, but there were some of injecting dye into water and blobs of water that were floating around. And I remember that being one of the key references that we were looking at.
This was a ballet. This was a really poignant moment at the end of someone's life, and at no point was it meant to be grotesque, but at the same time it couldn't be boring. So we kept playing with ideas of how these, just the shape before they even moved, just how the shape would exist. Are they just spheres, which tended to be the way liquid coalesces? in 0G as just a sphere. Maybe it ripples or warps. But he quite liked some of the tubes, that want a better word, that when they break, they move. And again, how they moved and the speed they moved was all very important to George, particularly in conjunction with the music. The only 2 shots that George was absolutely adamant, well, 3 shots, were the helmet coming off. There had to be a pressure equalization, and the blood had to come out of the helmet. But again, it couldn't be gory. And watching pints of blood stream out of someone's neck, and not make it look gory is incredibly difficult. The other one that we had to match was the tableau at the end, as we fade out and pull out from Maya as she lies dying, and that was some blood had to follow the camera. So the rest was kind of pretty much up to us and was designed by us as a dance, and I think Framestore did a great job.
Yeah, it was a nice quite a tight feedback loop between our effects team at Framestore and just getting stuff to Matt to show to George, and I think it was they did and Graham did a great job of kind of corralling that, and we tried to be as responsive as possible, because it seemed like there was a lot riding. We went into doing these shots of blood, and we thought, we'll do some simulated blood, and it won't be a big thing. And then what we very quickly realised was this was the visual effect that everybody really cared about, because it was very poetic. It was very, it was just a very poignant, important moment in the story, and it had to be right.
One thing Jenny didn't want us to do was use practical blood on set. We had 1 suit for each cast member, and they were worth a lot of money. So we vowed that if there was going to be any blood interaction, that would all be digital. And as it turned out, it worked very well, because there isn't much physical interaction with the suits or with the environment. The blood is its own entity within the volume, and I think that works well. But that was brought about due to the expense of the suits.
Easier to make them dirty in the computer.
Exactly, yeah, than it is to clean.
In pre-production, we did do some planning with stunts, and they used the previs to kind of figure out where the where the wires were going to be to a certain degree, just the staging of the 3 of them. And I think one of the shots that was particularly challenging to create was when they bring Maya into the airlock, and it's a beautiful shot, because as it plays in the movie, you would never realise it, but that's actually done completely CGI. It's totally digital, because we did try and shoot it, but it was very, very challenging to get the movement, dragging another human body, and you're all on wires and it's swinging around. And we had this, by this point, we were sort of quite in the flow of using using these digital faces, and we knew we had a good spacesuit, and we knew that we'd built the interior airlock as a CG asset, so we could make that choice in editorial. Actually, I think we were looking at the dailies and just feeling like it could be better and it could feel more real, and I think it's borne out. It did work.